The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
Welcome to Squawk Box Europe. I'm Karen Cho with Steve Sedgwick and Ben Boulos. These are your headlines. Tech and software stocks are sliding for a third day. Oracle, Salesforce and Palantir now down double digits on the week. The gloom spilling into crypto with Bitcoin briefly breaking below $61,000.
UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer comes under increasing pressure, apologising for appointing Peter Mandelson as US envoy despite knowing of his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. BOE Governor Andrew Bailey tells CNBC the turmoil in Westminster is adding to the global uncertainty.
I'm not going to comment on UK politics, that's certainly not for me, but in terms of the overall level of uncertainty, we will continue to watch it because, it is at a heightened level globally.
Amazon shares plunge 11% after hours as the company posts its first earnings miss in more than 3 years and announces $200 billion in capex spending for the year ahead, well beyond analyst expectations.
A momentous week on markets to me. We've had a wipeout in all quarters from the safe haven space and metals. That's been a roller coaster ride for investors to a crypto wipeout. It's extended to the other end, the most undefensive part of the markets. $2 trillion wipeout on Thursday. And you've seen it in the software space that has stretched across to chips. So the software space are cratering 20 to 25 odd percent around fears of the disruption from Anthropic, that you're looking at some sort of generational disruption here. And it's stretched across to the chip space just while big tech has been reporting about their massive capex programs. And the latest overnight has been the likes of Amazon with a huge program that's even deeper than the spending plans from Google. So I think the market has had so much to contend with this week and has just not digested it very well at all.
Well, I mean, we thought that Alphabet's announcement of capex spending on AI infrastructure was big when they announced it, $185 billion this coming year. And then Amazon went and exploded through that figure, saying $200 billion on capex spending this year. And I think the response we've seen on the markets, it underpins this idea that there was always going to come a point where investors were going to think, right, we need to see where the return is going to come from and when the return is going to come from on all this spending. And whether that's realistic at this stage or not, given, I suppose, how relatively in its infancy the technology is and the way it's still developing and moving forward all the time, whether are they being unreasonable in their expectations that they want to see within a certain time that return, or is this something that now these big hyperscalers are going to have to get used to having to prove where that money is going to yield a return? No,
and I've been writing about this on CNBC and on my socials as well. There's a lot of phenomenon going on here as well. I'm going to pick you up on one thing. Mm-hmm. There has been a port in the storm, and it's a stock which I admire for their strategy and always have admired for their strategy, and I've mentioned it many times on this show.
Staples.
And that's No, Apple. Oh. Apple, in the last 5 days, is up 7.3%. And I've mentioned many times my admiration for their second mover advantage, because I think whilst everyone else is spending vast amounts of money building the infrastructure, what has Apple done? It's done a licensing agreement with the likes of Alphabet as well. So they pay per view almost. As soon when they use the product, they're not paying to create the product; they're paying to use the product. And
it seems to be down the track, though.
What?
That could be costly down the track.
I disagree entirely. I think Apple have always nailed it on basically taking their time and building the best product and not having to be the one that's gone through all that R&D phase and actually just saying, okay, that's a really great piece of technology, we'll buy that in.
Well done finding one stock, though. But the reality is there have been double-digit declines in a lot of big names, and the fact we saw 11% decline in Amazon.
But it's clearly not the only stock,
The
is
S&P 500 negative now for the year. Yeah. I think there's been lots of different craters across the market trying to navigate. And, of course, the staples, the real defensives the market's gone for. Boring is best, it seems. seems, despite all the spicy, risky trade out there that the market's loved for the past year. Now, let's just take a look at that Amazon share price, down 11% in extended trade after the e-commerce giant joined its peers in announcing a major increase in capital spending on AI. The company said it expected CapEx to hit $200 billion this year, up from the $131 billion in 2025, and sharply higher than had been expected. Meanwhile, fourth quarter earnings were a mixed bag. EPS came in at $1.95 per share, missing expectations, but key businesses such as the company's cloud unit, AWS, Amazon Web Services, posted its fastest growth in 13 quarters. Tech heavyweights have laid out aggressive spending plans in AI in recent weeks, with hyperscalers such as Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet and Meta collectively pledging to spend around $660 billion on AI infrastructure this year. To put that into context, that is more than the GDP of countries such as Israel, Singapore and the UAE. Arjun has the latest. Arjun, the sweet spot for Amazon is that it does have links to Anthropic, one of the early investors in Anthropic, the disruptor we know this week. But the CapEx plan, I mean, it was eye-watering, and the market simply just took the stock lower on that spend.
Yeah, look, I think if you're going to come out with a figure that's bigger than any of your peers, when already people were questioning what Google had come out with, you need to back it up with numbers that, quite frankly, please the market. And if you look at AWS growth, it's lower than what we saw from Microsoft and what we saw from Google. If you look at their guidance, particularly around operating profit, that came in lower than estimates as well.
The fact that it's not even the level; it's actually who the customer is.
It's who the customer is. It's the fact.
Did I read somewhere, Karen? I don't know did I read somewhere that 45% of that cloud revenue is coming from one customer, which may or may not be called OpenAI.
Yeah, or OpenAI, Anthropic.
Wowzers!
Yeah.
If you're worried about the doom loop, then
And Amazon was already sort of coming into this earnings report with a narrative around AI that many believed, Amazon wasn't keeping pace with, say, what Alphabet was doing, what Microsoft was doing as well. So there was already a lot that Amazon had to prove, I think, going into this. And, we know how important the cloud is. And I think that growth rate as well was of little concern to the market. And we saw, if we look across the earnings report, we saw Microsoft and they came out with their spending figure, but the market wasn't happy with the growth projections. We saw Alphabet came out with a big spending figure, but actually it wasn't down as much as Microsoft because it was saying, hey, we have this huge backlog of cloud customers. And now we see Amazon, huge spending number, but not backing it up with the future business as well.
To me, Amazon's spending plans are a bit scattergun too. It's everything we've spoken about: AI, chips, robotics, low Earth orbit satellites, which takes it into the SpaceX category. So it was very broad brushstrokes where it needs to be spending the money trying to get ahead in the AI race. Is that a problem, that the non-targeted nature of the spend?
Yeah, look, I think right now the market wants to see, I think, as to Ben's point, where's this return on investment coming from? And if the cloud computing business isn't necessarily, going really strong, that's going to be of big concerns. I think there are so many areas, and I think this is not new from tech companies. We've seen it over the years. When the market doesn't want them to spend, they spend anyway, and they may have the sort of payoff down the line. And we've seen that. I mean, the reason these hyperscalers are hyperscalers now is because of the investments they were making all those years ago, perhaps when people were questioning the size of the investments back then. We may be in for a similar ride here, but I think there is a huge amount of uncertainty about the level of investment, unprecedented, of course, and will that pay off down the line? And I think, right now these tech companies are asking investors to have faith that this spending will pay dividends down the line. They're investing in and that, I think, is really uncertain right now.
One of the things that I found fascinating, joining the dots across the various results and commentary we've had this week, when you hear from the chip makers that actually they fear there's a shortage of memory chips imminent because so much is being eaten up by these data centers, these really hungry data centers, to build the AI infrastructure. They think there's a potential that the devices that we use to access the AI apps, the phones, the tablets, all the rest of it, the prices could jump for those because of this shortage of memory chips. And just wonder, where one of the bright spots for Apple was the sales of its iPhone. If the prices go up where that starts to hit sales, we have an irony there that all this spending on AI makes the devices to access AI perhaps beyond the reach of some people.
Yeah, I think Apple's probably the most insulated in terms of consumer electronics companies from the memory shortage. Where you're going to see the biggest impact is smartphone and consumer electronics players playing in the lower end of the market, the mid to low price devices. And so you can think of some of those Chinese companies who are playing in that segment. You can think of perhaps some of the smaller device players. Because of Apple's supply chain, because they almost have a sort of in with a lot of these companies, they are able to get supply. Not saying they won't potentially have to consider price rises, but if you think about Apple's consumer, they are probably one of the only companies in the world who could raise prices and the consumer be okay with it.
I think you're right, and they don't pay the full price of the phone anyway. They just don't notice it because it's monthly.
It's monthly, yeah.
But that's another one of my bones of contention. Just re-googling Vibe coding, a software development approach where AI generates functional code from natural language prompts, shifting the human role from writing code to guiding the AI testing and providing feedback. I say this because I have said for a long time, I know I'm going to upset probably a load of you out there. I've got amazingly smart kids who are going coding, but I don't think there's any point in teaching your kids coding because there ain't a bit of software in the world in 5 years that ain't going to be able to do it better. My point being is that everyone was looking at co-work at the start of the week and saying what a nightmare it is for the enterprise software. And I think we're all agreed it's a big challenge, you know. Anthropic has launched another product this week, which is wiping the floor with ChatGPT-5, apparently in early tests, but also it is going to boost that Vibe working code. It's called Claude Opus 4.6, and you know a little bit about this as well. All I'm saying is, once again, there's lots of things we can talk about here, but once again, it is a product that's coming out that is getting the zeitgeist, the excitement, and it ain't OpenAI, and it ain't Grok.
And I think importantly with Anthropic, they've been very clear from the start that we're going to target the enterprise. And so what you're seeing...
Enterprise, not the consumer.
Not the consumer. And what you're seeing with Opus, co-working, so they're very targeted enterprise products. OpenAI said, we're going to come out with ChatGPT. It went viral. Loads of consumers loved it. How do we productize that, monetize that for the enterprise? And that's a very different tactic from Anthropic, which I think is why they're seeing right now this kind of virality to some extent around their product.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, Arjun, thank you very much. We will see you a bit later. Coming up on the show, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer looks to shore up support within his party amid the fallout from the Peter Mandelson scandal. Plus, it's Super Bowl weekend, but the NFL is already looking ahead to a bigger global push than ever before next season. Tom Chitty will join us with the details. And the earnings continue thick and fast here in Europe. We'll be joined by the CFO of Telenor at 9:30 London time.
Executive Decisions is the new podcast from CNBC, where I ask powerful leaders about their decisions that changed everything. I'm Steve Sedgwick, and here's the CEO of Siemens Energy, Christian Bruch.
Business leaders should not stay quiet in a world which is super complex. We sit in a privileged position, and we have to use that to ensure that a society remains prosperous, stable, successful.
That's Executive Decisions with me, Steve Sedgwick. Get it wherever you're listening to this. Downing Street has reportedly stood by the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer's, Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, amid continuing scrutiny over the Peter Mandelson scandal. The Prime Minister's faced questions on his leadership since he admitted on Wednesday that he knew about Mandelson's ongoing relationship with Epstein before he appointed the Labour peer US ambassador. Now, Starmer met with MPs from his own party at Chequers' country home on Thursday night in a bid to shore up support, amid anonymous briefing from MPs and ministers that his leadership is under threat. In a speech on Thursday, which I listened to, it was in my own county, it was down in Hastings, Mr. Starmer gave more detail on his account of the experience with Mandelson, who is expected to be interviewed by the police in coming days.
Before he was appointed ambassador, Mandelson was asked directly about the nature of his relationship with Epstein. He was asked whether he had stayed at Epstein after his conviction. And when, later, further information came to light, he was asked whether he had accepted gifts and hospitality about whether he had been fully transparent about the relationship. The information now available makes clear that the answers he gave were lies. He portrayed Epstein as someone he barely knew. And when that became clear, and it was not true, I sacked him. Such deceit is incompatible with public service.
The scandal is a blow for the Prime Minister's authority, but it isn't clear how or when any leadership challenge could be mounted. Four key riders who are regarded as possible contenders all have their own issues. Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, is deeply unpopular with a net favourability rating of -56. According to YouGov. Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham has been blocked by party machinery for running for MP. Health Secretary Wes Streeting, but this is very interesting, has himself been close to Mr Mandelson, or Lord Mandelson. Is he now Lord? I think he's still Mr now, isn't he? In the past. And former Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner is still subject to a tax probe. OK, all that's certain now is that British politics is in for even more uncertainty. So let's get the view from the other side. Greg Stafford, MP, Opposition Whip and Conservative MP, joins us now. Greg, really nice to see you. How familiar does this feel, this territory, to a period you know very well, which is back in July 2022, when ultimately Boris Johnson had to stand down?
Well, good morning, and let me be clear. I wasn't a member of Parliament at that point, so I'm only hearing some of that secondhand. But I think what was very clear at Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday was the moment when the Prime Minister admitted that he knew that Peter Mandelson had an ongoing close friendship relationship with the paedophile, Jeffrey Epstein, and there was an audible gasp, not just from our side, but especially from Labour benches. And I think that was the moment that I think everybody in the chamber knew that this was certainly the beginning of the end, if not the end itself. The Prime Minister's authority has entirely slipped away. And I think, he may not go today, he may not go this week, but I think that he doesn't have long for the political world.
I thought I agree. I thought it was amazing. And there wasn't the usual kind of mass heckling from both sides. It was very attentive. And I thought, as you say, it was a jaw-drop moment. But I think your own leader, Kimi Badenoch, had one of her best performances as well, very to the point as well. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of people knew, and the evidence was there, whether it was the Bloomberg report or the FT as well. I mean, Greg, you know this better than I do. A lot of people knew that there was still an ongoing relationship, but that's very, very different from the concerns now being raised about Lord Mandelson's conduct when he was in the government as well, and of Gordon Brown's government as well. So a lot of smart people are saying, yes, OK, there was a relationship, but he was the right man for the right job. Now it turns out, obviously, there were other things going on.
I don't think he was the right man for the right job. I mean, he'd already been sacked or forced to resign from government twice before for misdemeanors and other scandals. So the idea that you had to bring back into government, I think, was the wrong one. And whilst you're absolutely right, we didn't know the level of the relationship between Epstein and Mandelson. And we certainly, I don't think, had any idea that he was passing sensitive information to him from his time in government. I think what was clear was that Peter Mandelson wasn't called the Prince of Darkness because he was a happy, normal person. He was a greaser, a smoozer. He was somebody who really played the dark arts of politics. And to then appoint that man to the most senior position in our diplomatic service, I think was a grave error on the part of the Prime Minister, even if he didn't know the details that we now know. And so I think the Prime Minister has to go on that. But what I think we also need to see about this, and that's what we were trying to do as the opposition on Wednesday, was to get all the papers released so we can have some idea of the level of the intricacies and the web that Peter Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein were weaving together at a time, let's remember, back in 2008, 2009, when this country and the world was in a real difficult state because of the economic crises that were going on. So to have somebody in the heart of government giving information to someone who was not part of government, I think is really, really worrying. And I'm glad that the Metropolitan Police are investigating that.
And look, again, Kimmy Badenoch was making the point about the ISC, and you know, fair play to her on this one as well. But as the Prime Minister did say, the Met Police have asked them and got involved. So there are issues there of why the Prime Minister might not wanted to release all that information. But I want to move on, if I may, Greg. Gorton and Denton is upon us as well. We are 20 days away. And quite frankly, who knows? Because the vote's going to be split and reform, and obviously certain Labour MPs didn't get the man they wanted to stand in Gorton and Denton. Is anyone ready to take over as Prime Minister? Your own party doesn't appear to be high enough in the polls to want a general election. Domestically, we've mentioned the 4 players within the Labour Party who just have got their own problems if they were to become Prime Minister. It's all very well getting rid of Keir Starmer, but who would take over?
Well, I think you're right there. It's there's clearly, and I see it as a member of Parliament watching Labour colleagues huddling in corners with various factions, and you see people around Angela Rayner or around Wes Streeting, or indeed Ed Miliband, an interesting choice if there ever was one. So there are people waiting in the wings, but I don't get the impression from talking to Labour colleagues that any of them are quite willing to put their head above the parapet, because I think there is a belief in the Labour Party that the first mover, whoever moves against the Prime Minister first, will not succeed him. And I think, therefore, I don't think at the moment any of the key players who might take over really have the guts or the willingness to remove him.
Greg, it's Ben here. Obviously, you have an opposite number, a whip on the Labour benches. Just giving us an insight into what sort of conversations will be going on. What's your opposite number doing right now? Is it sussing out who is prepared to back the Prime Minister if it came to a crunch vote, or are they trying to sort of figure out who might emerge as whether it's a stalking horse or an ultimate challenger?
Well, I think both of those things are going on to a degree, but actually from what I'm sensing, it's very much day to day. The whips on Wednesday were doing their absolute best to try and get Labour members to support the Prime Minister against our humble address motion, and they were clearly failing on that, hence the very last minute amendment from the government on this. I suspect what they're trying to do is get to the parliamentary recess, which is in about a week's time, make sure there are no great upsets or scandals in that time, and hopefully have a reset at that point. But it would be silly of them, and I'm certain they are doing, if they're not taking soundings, both in terms of who is still supportive of the Prime Minister, and I suspect that number is diminishing, but also looking to see who's supporting, because the whips themselves are politicians, and they're looking to see where their next meal may come from politically.
In a time when two-party politics dominated, this would obviously play very strongly to the advantage of the party in opposition, in this case the Conservatives. But things have changed, haven't they? We now have a situation where you have a real threat to both of the established parties from Reform UK. The Greens are proving to be increasing in popularity under their new leader. Is there a danger that despite the woes for Labour out of all this, the beneficiaries are not the Conservatives, but it comes to benefit Reform and the Greens?
Well, let me be clear, first of all. I mean, I do accept that there is an ancillary benefit, if that's the right word, of the dire state the Labour government is in. But I think this is a bigger crisis and a bigger issue with our politics. So I take no pleasure in the fact that we've discovered these scandals about Peter Mandelson. Obviously, I think of the victims of Epstein, who must be feeling absolutely appalled at the way the Prime Minister has acted. But to your point, we are in a different world at the moment. As you say, party politics is no longer a two-party politics. I'm not saying that it will never return to that, but I think certainly if you're talking about the Gorton and Denton by-election, we will see a result that I don't think we've seen in by-elections for a long time, where the winner will win only, I think, by a few percentage points, and there will be a plethora of other parties, who are competitive in that. I think as the Conservatives, what we need to do is to go back to what we've been saying, which is to have a secure, stable opposition with a plan about how we're going to change the things that we think are broken in our politics and in our country. And I think Kemi Badenoch set that out very clearly in a number of her speeches over the last couple of weeks. And, whilst I accept the polls are not yet putting us atop, we're seeing a small incremental increase. And I think as we go through the next months and years, as we get to a proper general election, I think we have every confidence that the public will see that we are a credible opposition and a credible potential next government.
Yeah, especially seeing you're having a clear out care of Nigel Farage, or he's taken a certain number of your MPs anyway. Greg, it's fascinating at the moment as well. Really, really good to hear from you. Thank you so much indeed for that. Greg Stafford, who is MP for the great constituency of Farnham and Borden as well, also opposition whip and Conservative MP, as I mentioned. Right. Whittaker spoke to the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, on Thursday and asked about the recent turmoil in politics and what impact it could have on the UK economy.
We, of course, have had a huge amount of what I might call global uncertainty that we've had around for the last year. And one of the interesting things, looking back now, is that the world economy has been more robust, frankly, looking back, than we thought it would be a year ago, looking forwards. Now, that doesn't mean that therefore it follows naturally that we will just sort of sail through all of this uncertainty around the world, unaffected. I think we've been less affected over the last year than we thought would be the case. So we watch this very carefully, obviously. I'm not going to comment on UK politics, that's certainly not for me, but in terms of the overall level of uncertainty, we will continue to watch it because, it is at a heightened level globally.
The Bank of England held rates as expected yesterday, but it was really exciting. It was genuinely exciting. The MPC was way more divided than expected in a 5-4 split. Now, markets increased bets on further easing after the meeting, now seeing an over 85% chance of a cut by the April meeting, according to LSEG data. Wow. Whittaker spoke to the governor, about the decision and what he needs to see to change his vote.
The debate is all around now, what's the right policy setting, what's the right level of interest rates to keep it there. And the confidence that not only will inflation come down, but it will stay there. And there are different views on the committee on that, which I think is perfectly reasonable. These are judgments we have to make about the future. I think some of my colleagues feel that they've seen enough and then voted to cut. Some of them, sort of going to the other end of the distribution, felt, look, I'm still very worried about particularly persistence, more persistent inflation. Really if you like, a sort of hangover of some of the shocks we've seen in the past. I'm probably in the middle camp actually, saying, look, I'm encouraged by what we're seeing, but I do want to see some more evidence that we are going to get the things that we need to see in terms of developments. For instance, in services, inflation, and wage setting, that will take us there sustainably.
A riveting hold there yesterday from the BOE, but we also heard from the ECB yesterday, the central bank holding rates for a 5th straight meeting as markets had anticipated. In its policy statement, the Governing Council said inflation should stabilise at its 2% target in the medium term and described the euro area economy as resilient. President Lagarde describing growth and inflation risks as balanced in her press conference. Of course, don't forget that inflation rate 1.7% these days, below the 2% target. Now, Lagarde was also asked about the impact of the euro's recent appreciation. It was not in the statement, so it was down to the press conference for this to be raised. And Lagarde pushed back on suggestions it is a major factor impacting the outlook.
The dollar has depreciated measurably against the euro, but not in the last few days. But since March 2025, that's when you see the significant change at the time. And in the last few weeks, actually since the summer, it has fluctuated within a range. And whether you look at the euro-US dollar, whether you look at nominal effective exchange rate, the story is the same. So, as a result of that observation, we concluded that the impact of exchange rate appreciation since last year is incorporated in our baseline.